how's it going? Welcome to D4, D&D Deep Dive. This is the show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons. We crunch numbers about them, we theorycraft about them, not so that I can tell you the right way or the best way to play a particular character, but just to explore one potential way to build and play a character in D&D in the hopes of creating something that is both really fun to play, but also powerful. So if you enjoy creating characters for D&D almost as much as you enjoy playing the actual game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on building and playing a certain character that you have in mind, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I am so glad you're here. My name's Colby, and no, you do not need to adjust your speaker settings. This is my actual voice today. If you thought it was hard to stay awake for 50-something minutes listening to my normal voice, just wait until you have to endure 50-something minutes of my I'm getting over a cold voice. You'll never make it. I'll just see you after your nap. I'll still be here, don't worry. D&D ASMR indeed. Right, so really quick, if you would be interested in having a cheat sheet, a step-by-step guide to help you recreate this character and all the other characters that I do for this channel for that matter, or if you're just looking for a way to support me and the channel and help me create more and better content, I would really appreciate it if you would consider joining as a member. There should be a little button down there that says join. For $2 a month, you get access to the library of write-ups that I create for each of these builds so that you don't have to go back and rewatch the video or take notes. Whether you are a channel member or not, just watching and liking and subscribing and commenting, those are all also great ways to support the channel, so thanks. Right, so I think that D&D 5e has a bit of a problem when it comes to game design, and it's this. It's not particularly good at scaling, or at the very least, it's not very consistent at it, right? I mean, think for just a moment about all of the abilities and features in the game that are like, at level 3, you get this ability that lets you do an extra d6 of damage when you use it. And then 5 or 7 levels later, invested into that character class, that d6 goes up to a d8. So if you invest several levels of your character's career into this class, you can get 1 more damage on average when you use this ability. Meanwhile, enemies in the game are seeing their own hit points increase by the tens and dozens over the same period of time, right? That feels so strange to me. And then there are the classes themselves that scale really poorly, and especially martial classes, the non-spellcaster weapon users. Spellcasters generally fare pretty well from a scaling perspective because every so often you're getting new and more powerful spells and often able to upcast existing ones to greater effect and or for more damage. But martial characters, barbarians invest several levels to get 1 more damage die when they crit, which is usually less than 10% of the time. That's such a paltry increase. Oh, and don't forget their rage damage goes from 2 all the way up to 3 after you invest 9 levels into the class, which for many of us means that we'll never actually see that increase before the campaign ends, right? Now, sure, there are exceptions to this. Fighters get a really strong feature at level 11, a 3rd attack. That's really something to shoot for, right? It just does so much to increase our power and damage potential. And, rogues at least get an extra d6 of damage to their sneak attack every other level. So there's some built-in scaling, which is pretty consistent, and that's nice. Though, as I feel like we've done a pretty decent job of demonstrating, most recently with the Quickened Blade a couple weeks ago, even getting sneak attack twice in a round with a lot of investment of energy and resources doesn't really keep you scaling quite as well as you might hope. Now, of all the classes that demonstrate poor scaling, I think the monk might be the biggest loser, despite what I said last week about barbarians. Now, I love monks, most of you know this, and I'm not really quite sure where this love originated. It might be because the very first time I was introduced to D&D back when I was 9 years old, my big brother, who introduced the game to me, made me a monk character to play his little homebrew dungeon that he'd created. I had nunchucks. I knew Kung Fu, or at least the version of Kung Fu that my 9-year-old white boy brain had an understanding of. But ever since then, my favorite fantasy in D&D has been to play this character that uses no weapons, no armor, nay, who needs no weapons or armor, because their body and their mind are all that they need. They are agile, impossible to hit, strike like the wind, hitting chi points on their enemy's body to stun them, etc., etc. And of all the monk classes, none of them, I don't think, embody that kung fu fantasy quite like the Way of the Open Hand. They are the quintessential master of technique and tranquility. And most alluringly of all their features is their level 17 feature, Quivering Palm, right? It's one of the only save or die abilities in the game, and it just represents everything that I want in a monk character. You hit an enemy with an unarmed strike and set up imperceptible vibrations in their body that you can end and then cause them instant death. If that's not the whooshy finger hold in D&D, then I don't know what is. Skadoosh. So, maybe you could argue that this pretty powerful ability is an example of how monks do scale well, right? No. Because to get there, it requires 17 levels invested into a class and subclass that, as much as I love them, just don't really give you much past level 5. I mean, after you get extra attack at monk level 5, between that and level 17, so 12 levels, the only increase that you get to your damage is that your martial arts die, which you're typically only using once, maybe twice per round for unarmed strikes, goes from a d6 to a d8. That's it. Now, calm down. I can hear you screaming from here. It's not all about the numbers, you Chad. And I get it. You're right. There is a lot more to D&D, and even D&D combat, than just more damage. And monks and open-hand monks do get plenty of cool, fun, utility, flavor, and even defensive options along the way to level 17. I guess what I'm wanting, more than anything, is to keep the cool, fun, utility, flavor, and defensive options, but just give me a little better scaling on the damage while you're at it. Let's see that martial arts die increase more and more quickly. Let's see a third attack on Flurry of Blows, right? Because at the end of the day, without things like that, it's so hard not to multi-class out of monk and lots of other classes that suffer from similar challenges. As bad as I want to use that whooshy finger hold on the Tai Longs of the world, I know that because most classes and subclasses tend to have so many of their best features pretty front-loaded, meaning I can pick them up with 1 to 5 levels invested in another class, it tends to make multi-classing so much more appealing in the vast majority of cases, especially for martial characters. It's already super unlikely that I'm going to even play a campaign that goes all the way to character level 17. Wizards of the Coast, could you at least please make the decision on whether or not to multiclass a little tougher, more consistently across all classes? Give me better reasons to stick with my chosen class all the way to level 17. I'm begging you. So yeah, that brings us to today's build. I want to do an open-hand monk. It is, as I've said, like my greatest fantasy for a D&D character, but I just can't stomach taking open hand past level 5, maybe 6, and that makes me sad. But here's the good news. There is a multi-class option that pairs ever so sweetly with open hand that it almost makes me forget my pain of not getting to the whooshy finger hold. It brings incredible synergy, tons of fun, really strong additional sustained damage, which is what we're building for today, and even makes us potentially a pretty fantastic support character to boot. So, are you ready to cleanse away the awful taste in your mouth that my preamble gave you? Because I am. So let's dive into episode 119, Monks and Mushrooms. The Monk and the Briar Patch. The Open Hand Cheese Grater. Kung Fungal. How about the Way of the Open Spores? Or even better, the Open Spores Drunk. If that doesn't conjure an image, that's so bad, I have to use it. Episode 119, the Open Spores Drunk. All right. At level 1, for our starting class, we are going Monk. If you can believe it, we're actually starting with Monk. Even though, as I've mentioned, we are going to be multi-classing before long, I do, yes, really envision this character as a monk at their core, at their nucleus. Because beneath the clothes we find a monk, and beneath the monk we find his nucleus. As for our race, more than almost any other character class, I think, most monks anyway really need 2 ability scores to perform at their very best. For that reason, I'm going to recommend that we go Mountain Dwarf here with our race, as they are the only racial option that gives you a +2 to 2 ability scores. I kind of feel like that outweighs anything that any other racial option could bring us for this particular character. But feel free to go a different route if you have strong feelings about it, of course. But as for us, yes, when we first meet our champion, they are a dwarf who is living deep in their underground mountain home. And yes, they are part of a monkish monastery there. As with most monkish monasteries, they are very interested in expanding their view of themselves to include the natural world. But unlike most monasteries, the natural world for our particular monk isn't so much forests and birds and squirrels as it is lichen and mushrooms, bats and slugs, and other cave-dwelling creatures that make up our monk's natural habitat. Now, one of the reasons that I actually wanted to go Mountain Dwarf here as well is, surprisingly, because Mountain Dwarves get proficiency with both medium and light armor. Hang on a minute, you might be saying. I thought we were going monk, so why do we care about armor proficiency? That's a great question, and it's not because we plan on using armor, like some of you might be thinking. No, instead, it is for this reason. In Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we were given a new rule about swapping out racial proficiencies in an effort to allow us to customize our origin a little bit better. As per that rule, we can, among other things, swap out an armor proficiency that we get from our race to a simple or martial weapon or tool. This means for us that we can swap out our light or medium armor proficiency for longsword proficiency, which we very much want, and I love that we get to do that here. And I mean, right, since we have no plans to wear armor on this character, feel free to swap out the other armor proficiency with, say, thieves' tools if you want to be really good at picking locks or disarming traps, or, another tool or even another weapon if you really wanted to. As for our ability scores, I'm assuming that we are going to go with the point buy method as always, and would recommend that we start with a 15 dexterity and take one of our +2s there, a 15 wisdom and take our other +2 there, and then a 14 constitution, maybe a 15 depending on what you want to do at the very end of this character build, put a pin in it. For our equipment, the blessing and the curse of monks is that they don't really need a lot of equipment. So I probably just go the gold buy route and pick up 2 things. A quarterstaff for use now, and a longsword that we'll use later. Again, we're not going to need armor, so just grab any other necessities you may have. Maybe some darts or something to have a ranged option. And feel free to pocket the rest of your money. Or better yet, donate it to charity. And no, charity in this case does not include your rogue companion. As a monk, then we get a couple of features. Unarmored defense. This tells us that our armor class is equal to 10 plus our wisdom and dexterity modifiers if we're not wearing armor or using a shield. That's kinda nice if we have high scores in both of those abilities, and we do, fortunately. So yeah, we're going naked. Okay, you could go naked, but put some clothes on. And we also get martial arts. This tells us that so long as we're not wearing armor or using a shield, and we're only using unarmed strikes or monk weapons to make attacks, monk weapons being short swords and simple weapons without the two-handed or heavy property, we can then use dexterity instead of strength for our +2 hit and damage with those weapons and our unarmed strikes. Also, we can roll our martial arts die for damage with our unarmed strikes. That's a d4 for now, but it scales with monk levels. And when we take the attack action, we can make an unarmed strike as a bonus action. So yes, for now, we'll be using that quarterstaff for our attacks, but keep in mind that you can use 2 hands to make the quarterstaff attacks. It's a versatile weapon, and as such can be used with 2 hands for a d8 of damage instead of a d6. And yeah, there's no prohibition for monks on using 2 hands to make a weapon attack, only that the attack can't be made with a weapon that has the two-handed or heavy property. And the quarterstaff doesn't have either of those, nor does the longsword for that matter, which we'll get into in a second. At level 2, we get Ki. Hooray for Ki, that resource that monks get that's needed for almost everything cool that they do, and of which there never seems to be quite enough. We get 1 Ki point per monk level, and they reset on a short rest. Right now, we can use our key to do 3 things. Patient Defense and Step of the Wind let us spend a key point to take the dodge or dash actions as a bonus action, respectively. And then Flurry of Blows, which we'll be focusing on, which lets us spend a key point to take 2 unarmed strikes as a bonus action when we take the attack action instead of the usual 1. So yeah, 3 attacks per turn now, so long as we have the key to spend. That's a pretty nice little benefit, no question. I just wish we had more key. Sincerely, every monk ever. We also get the unarmored movement feature here, which tells us that when, again, we're wearing no armor or shield, we get an extra 10 feet of move speed. More move speed is always good. We'll now have 35 feet of it, which makes us feel less bad for being a dwarf. And yeah, I really love this feature on my monk characters. But also, thanks again to Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we get the dedicated weapon feature at Monk 2. And this is really nice in that it tells us that after a rest, we can focus our key, touch a non-monk weapon, so long as it still does not have the heavy or two-handed property. And then, from that point on, we can use that weapon as a monk weapon. And thus, we see the wisdom in grabbing longsword proficiency by swapping out our dwarven armor proficiency, because yes, like I said, like the quarterstaff, the longsword has neither the two-handed nor heavy properties, but does have the versatile property, which pretty much makes it the highest damaging weapon that monks can use. So going forward, we'll get to use a D10 for our attack action attacks, and I'll welcome every small bump I can get. And something else to be said here, there tend to be a lot more magical longswords in the game than like quarterstaffs, so that in and of itself is a really great reason, I think, to make sure we have and can use longswords on our monks. At level 3, we get Deflect Missiles, which tells us that when we're hit by a ranged weapon attack, we can use our reaction to reduce the damage that it does to us by a D10 plus our Dex modifier plus our monk level, which should reduce most weapon attacks to 0. At this level anyway. And that's super cool. Feels super kung fu, right? We could also spend a key point to even better redirect that missile and make a weapon attack with it, using our martial arts die and dex modifier. But then, of course, monks at level 3 do get their monastic tradition, their monk subclass. And as I've said, we're going open hand, which is my favorite subclass, conceptually at least. But also, like I've said, while they get a pretty decent feature right at the beginning at level 3, the abilities that they pick up at level 6 and 11, like other monk subclasses, are pretty lackluster, in my opinion, making it difficult to just stick with monk throughout our character career, when you couple it with the fact that there's not a lot of other scaling that we get out of the main monk class. I really have high hopes for the way Wizards of the Coast remakes monks, and probably this subclass, I'm guessing, in the upcoming 1D&D Unearthed Arcana playtest. I mean, actually, that might be out by the time this video comes out in a couple of weeks. So here's hoping. Wizards of the Coast, please make monks better. Please, oh please, oh please. Anyway, as an open hand monk, we get the open hand technique ability, which tells us that whenever we hit a creature with one of the unarmed strikes granted us by Flurry of Blows, we can do one of 3 things. 1, force them to make a dexterity saving throw or they're knocked prone. Alright, that's not bad. If an enemy's prone, melee attacks against them are made with advantage. The big problem here, of course, is that this only happens with our Flurry of Blows attacks. And we've been told by Jeremy Crawford, very specifically, that Flurry of Blows doesn't happen until after all of our attacks with the attack action are done. And that makes me sad. I really wish open hand technique simply worked on any attack that used a monk weapon or an unarmed strike. Maybe that would be too powerful. You could always make it so that it only works once per turn or something. Anyway, as is, at best, we could knock them prone with our first attack from Flurry of Blows, and then we'd have advantage on our second Flurry of Blows unarmed strike. But after that, I'm assuming that the enemy's just gonna stand up on their turn, right? Unless we had them grappled, of course. And yes, before you ask, I do have a Way of the Open Hand Monk grappler on my to-do list. But anyway, knocking them prone like this would potentially be better for our melee allies than it would be for us. And that's not a bad thing. Also, we're not given any limit to how many times we can use our open hand technique on our turn. So sure, on the first flurry of blows attack, go ahead, try to knock him prone, and enjoy advantage on that second flurry of blows attack. We should really be doing this every time. Alternatively, though, with open hand, we could prevent them from taking reactions until our next turn. That's really nice if we wanted to play like a hit and run character who didn't want to worry about giving an enemy an opportunity attack against us so that we could just jump in, make our attacks, and get away to safety, or to shut an enemy spellcaster down from being able to use counterspell. But the open hand technique that I'm most interested in here, and that I'll kind of be building this character around, is this option that tells us you can force an enemy to make a strength saving throw or be pushed 15 feet away from you. Now, 15 feet is kind of a lot. Most abilities that let you move an enemy only let you move them 5 or 10 feet at most. So when I see that 15 feet, of course, I immediately think, what is there in D&D 5e that would let me take the best advantage of being able to move an enemy 15 whole feet with a single push? So yeah, at level 4, we're taking Druid levels, and I'm sure many of you can guess why. It turns out that our character's desire to become more at one with their natural world has developed into an even greater impulse to study and learn specifically about the mold and mushrooms that grow with such abundance in their cavernous home. They seek to nurture and incorporate the wonder of their world into their practice and power. But whatever your reasons, yeah, we're taking Druid levels now. So, as a Druid 1, we first learn Druidic, which is the Druid's language that they have to leave messages for others who can interpret the signs that they give with twigs and leaves and piles of dirt. And then we get spells. And there's really no spell that I'd plan on using in combat to increase our sustained damage per round, so go ahead and take all of your favorite Druid spells. Guidance for some nice utility, Thorn Whip when you need to bring an enemy closer to you. Entangle is pretty nice control. Fairy Fire for advantage, and of course Good Berry for both utility and very efficient healing. Healing Word is really great, of course, for some nice combat support. Anyway, pick your favorites. Have fun with it. At level 5, we get Wild Shape, and Wild Shape is fantastic. Again, as I often say, most druids who aren't moon druids anyway use Wild Shape primarily for utility, or they expend a use of their Wild Shape to do something else, either that your subclass allows, which will fall into that category, more on that in a moment, or also even to summon a familiar. But if we wanted to use it as it was originally written, we could use it twice per short rest to transform into a beast of 1/4 challenge rating or lower that did not have a flying or swimming speed, and we can stay in that form for a number of hours equal to half our druid level. While transformed, we can't cast spells, among other things, though we could concentrate on a spell we cast beforehand. I'm not going to assume that we're using it in combat, but it will provide some nice utility once in a while when you really need it. But yes, as for us, druids at Druid 2 get their Druidic Circle, their Druid subclass. And in case you hadn't guessed yet, we are, yes, going with the Circle of Spores. And because it's been so long since I've done a Spores Druid, let's read what Wizards of the Coast has to say about them. Druids of the Circle of Spores find beauty in decay. They see within mold and other fungi the ability to transform lifeless material into abundant, albeit somewhat strange, life. These druids believe that life and death are parts of a grand cycle, with one leading to the other, and then back again. Death isn't the end of life, but instead a change of state that sees life shift into a new form. Right, so as a Circle of Spores druid, we get 2 features, one good one and one less good one, until later. As for the less good one, it's Halo of Spores. This tells us that when a creature moves within 10 feet of us or ends their turn within 10 feet of us, we can use our reaction to cause the invisible necrotic spores that surround us to leash out and deal 1d4 necrotic damage, unless they make their Constitution saving throw. Boo! Against our wisdom-based DC. No half damage on a successful save or anything. So yeah, I mean, it's really low damage against the worst enemy saving throw that we could be targeting in D&D 5e, generally. and it costs us our reaction. Now, admittedly, we don't have a super reliable use of our reaction, but even giving up the chance to use Deflect Missile or take an opportunity attack just to try and do 1d4 of damage that has a fairly high likelihood of failing feels pretty bad. That's not going to stop me from using it when I crunch numbers, but still. Now, admittedly, the damage does scale, but kind of like I talked about in the preamble, not in a way that makes me think it's a really strong ability. But that's okay, because we do get Symbiotic Entity here as well, and this ability is pretty awesome. It tells us that as an action, we can use a use of our wild shape to awaken the spores that surround us, and this gives us 4 temporary hit points per druid level, and then for the next 10 minutes lets us double, yes, double our Halo of Spores damage, and better yet, deal an extra 1d6 of necrotic damage with each and every melee weapon attack we make. And yes, in case you didn't know, unarmed strikes do count as melee weapon attacks, though that might confuse some of you, but it's true. Look it up in the Sage Advice Compendium if you need to. I will quote, "An unarmed strike is a special type of melee weapon attack." So yes, an extra d6 on all of our attacks for 10 minutes without needing to concentrate on a Hex or Hunter's Mark spell is pretty nice damage, especially for monks who do get to make more attacks than most characters. That said, there are 2 drawbacks here. First, it takes our action to use Symbiotic Entity, and I hate that. Stars Druids can transform with just a bonus action. Why can't we? I really wish Wizards of the Coast would be a little more consistent in things like this. Anyway, having to spend an action to do this really cramps our style, because it means that we're going to have a couple of things we need to do with our action before we start punching stuff with this build, and that's going to make life a little rough. If it were me, I would do everything in my power to try and convince my DM to let me use Symbiotic Entity with a bonus action. Make cookies, give foot rubs, use that Stars Druid argument, whatever you gotta do. I hope you're successful. But the other drawback here is that the extra damage from Symbiotic Entity only lasts so long as we still have at least one of those temporary hit points that were granted us when we use the ability, which essentially means that in order to get the most out of Spores Druid, we kind of have to take lots and lots of levels in Spores Druid, since Symbiotic Entity again gives us 4 temporary hit points per druid level. There's really no Spores Druid dips. Once you start, it's hard to stop. And, that wouldn't be too big of an issue if not for the fact that because of the way key points work, we only get 1 key point per monk level. The same thing can kind of be said for monks, that once you start, it's hard to stop. It definitely puts us in a little bit of a conundrum here, making this build one of those, it's sustainable damage, but maybe for only like 1 combat encounter per short rest kind of builds. Now, some of you may play at a table like mine where we rarely even have more than 1 combat per short rest, and if that's the case, this build will work really, really well. For the rest, you might really need to be petitioning your table for more short rests than you typically get, or learn to do things other than just punch stuff every single combat encounter. But guess what? If the latter is the case, I've got great news for you. We're taking lots of druid levels, which means you will have a lot of useful and potent things to be doing during combat other than just punching stuff, if you want. Congratulations! At level 6, we would be a druid 3, and that means we get 2nd level druid spells. And this is the level where everything really kind of comes together for this build. So yes, heat metal, hold person, lesser restoration, pass without a trace. These are all great 2nd level druid spells. You should absolutely consider taking them. But the 2 I really want to focus on here is, first of all, you guessed it, Spike Growth, but also Moonbeam. Spike Growth, super fun. You cast it as an action, and that's where the potential problem comes in here. Too much action bloat, right? But then you cause the ground in a 20-foot radius, so 40 feet total end to end, to be covered in thorns and spikes. This area then becomes difficult terrain, so half move speed, and when a creature moves into or within the area, they take 2d4 damage for every 5 feet they travel. They don't get a saving throw to avoid this damage. If they move through it, they just take the damage. So yes, this is how we're taking advantage of that massive 15 feet of pushing that we get to do as an open hand monk. Hit them with a flurry of blows attack and just watch them their way through 15 feet of a briar patch. Now, some of you are going to want to argue that they don't take this damage if they're not willingly moving or using their own movement. And I mean, obviously, you can rule however you want to at your table, but the spell says nothing here about the movement needing to be willing. Jeremy Crawford himself has said that a push is an effective way to force a creature to enter an area of effect unless it requires willing movement. And again, the spell says nothing about willing movement. That's good enough for me. The other spell I think we need to make sure we grab here is Moonbeam. Moonbeam is really nice in that it does a d10 of damage per spell level that we cast it at, and then does damage to a creature both when they enter the area of effect of the spell, like say if they were pushed into it using our open hand technique, and when they start their turn there. I wouldn't plan on using Moonbeam at this level, or even for several levels to come, most of the time anyway, but it does have some potential advantages over Spike Growth. One, it can be moved on our turn if need be. Two, it's potentially less disruptive for our allies. It's only a 10-foot square area, and as great as Spike Growth is, it takes up a massive area on the battlefield, right? And while trapping enemies inside it and forcing them to slog through it is great, especially if you have a ton of melee companions, it can make things really awkward potentially, as those melee allies would also have to wade through the spikes themselves to sometimes get within melee range of an enemy, depending on the size of the room, depending on how many enemies you're fighting, etc. But also, finally, unlike Spike Growth, the damage for Moonbeam scales. Why doesn't Spike Growth scale? It seems odd to me. Can the thorns not get thicker and sharper? Cloud of Daggers damage scales. I don't know. Anyway, for all of those reasons, I want to have Moonbeam in my pocket to pull out when the situation calls for it, so that we can make the best use of our inherent pushing ability as an open hand monk. Alright, at level 6, it's time for our first damage report. So let's go over what I envision combat looking like for us here. First off, like I've said, we have some action bloat. We need our action both to cast Spike Growth and to get Symbiotic Entity going on ourselves. Frankly, that sucks. I'm hoping that you've either been able to convince your DM to let you use Symbiotic Entity as a bonus action, or that you are somewhat reliably able to do something like transform yourself right before combat breaks out, but you can tell that it's about to. And I mean, let's be honest, most of the time, and maybe I'm just speaking personally here, we kind of know when a fight is coming, right? If the villain is monologuing, use Symbiotic Entity. It lasts for 10 minutes. That's a pretty long monologue. Now, if you're unable to get one of those two things happening reliably, then you'll want to seriously consider picking up the Metamagic Adept feat. So you can grab Quicken Spell from the Sorcerer's Metamagic list, right? And cast Spike Growth at least once per day as a bonus action. So you don't need to take 2 whole rounds to set up your Wombo combo, because that would be really crippling. I don't mind 1 round of setup, especially since casting Spike Growth as part of that setup is not a bad use of our action. It's going to let you snare and slow and potentially damage very often multiple enemies on the battlefield. So there's some sound tactical stuff going on there, but 2 rounds of setup, that's too much. Anyway, once you've finished your setup, it's pretty straightforward. You run up to an enemy, ideally a melee enemy, that's right on the edge of your patch of Spike Growth, and make an attack against them with your longsword, then burn a key point and make 2 unarmed strikes against them using Flurry of Blows. On the first, like I've said, try to knock them prone so you can make the second with advantage. Then, with that second Flurry of Blows attack, you push them 15 feet deep into the briar patch. You get to add a d6 to each attack thanks to Symbiotic Entity, plus 3 for our dexterity modifier. And don't forget, if there's a second enemy nearby that you could also push into Spike Growth, go ahead and push the first target with your first unarmed strike, then move over and try to push that second one, right? Upon moving 15 feet, the enemy's going to take 6d4 damage, and then on their turn, assuming that they're melee, they're going to take 6d4 more damage as they try to wade out of the briar patch. in order to do something useful. Of course, if you knocked them prone before you pushed them, on their turn, they'd have to use half their move speed to stand up, and then most likely, depending on the enemy, not quite be able to even get out of the spike growth field since it's difficult terrain. And that is just freaking glorious. If they decide to stay put or they can't get out of that briar patch, that's an even bigger win for us generally than them taking a little bit more damage most of the time, right? I'm going to assume, just for ease of number crunching, that they're moving through 15 feet of spike growth on their turn. And also, yes, that we are using our reaction to do 2d4 damage to one enemy per round with Halo of Spores, since I always crunch numbers based on best case scenario. But if everything works according to plan, the enemy would be taking 1d10 plus 3d6 plus 14d4 plus 9 damage in a round. And thus, against an enemy with a plus 10 to their AC and a plus 0 to their strength and constitution saving throws, we would on average do 49 damage per round. And against an enemy with a 15 and a plus 5 to their saves, it would be 33 DPR. And wait, 49 and 33 with a monk druid that doesn't even have extra attack yet? I was not expecting that. That's like middle of tier 1 compared to other sustained damage builds that I've done to date. Check the link in the video description to see those spreadsheets and comparisons. But yeah, whoa Nelly, let's hold our horses here, right? We only have 3 key points at the moment. That doesn't really even meet my own you can do this much damage for an entire combat encounter criteria to qualify something as being a sustained damage build, outside of those very short combats that happen once in a while. Not yet, anyway. So yeah, it's really a little bit more like a burst damage build at the moment that can burst 3 times per short rest. I'm going to keep them in the sustained damage comparison chart anyway because we will be getting more key points, and I don't really have a hybrid chart yet, though I might have to make one someday. Now, not only that, but yeah, that extra d6 of damage that we get from Symbiotic Entity only lasts until our temporary hit points run out, and it requires some setup. So yeah, this is really good damage, make no mistake, but it comes with plenty of asterisks or caveats, so that definitely tempers our numbers somewhat. But I am excited by those numbers. That's really solid damage. Let's see where we can take it from here. At level 7, yes, now that we have spike growth and our symbiotic entity secured, I think we need to go back to monk for a bit. First off, just to get more key points so that we can keep using flurry of blows as often as possible, but also because we do at monk 4 now get an ability score increase or feat. And I think we've got to go +1 to dex and +1 to wisdom here. I think going any other route would be a mistake. Getting both our dexterity and our wisdom up to an 18, like this would do, would give us a +2 to our armor class. And remember, not getting hit is especially important for us since we need to hold on to those temporary hit points as long as possible. It's going to mean an increase to our hit and damage, of course, but also decrease the likelihood that our enemy makes their save against our push into spike growth, not to mention our amazing Halo of Spores damage. So yeah, having our 2 most important ability scores at 18 by level 7 feels awesome. We also at monk 4 get one of my favorite monk abilities, Slowfall. It just speaks to all the flavor and fun of this class, even if it's not particularly amazing mechanically. It lets you use your reaction to reduce any fall damage that you take by 5 times your monk level, and since we take 1d6 for every 10 feet that we fall, that means we can fall between 50 and 60 feet on average and take 0 damage when we do so. And I just love that image of floating gently to the ground because we are just that lithe and dexterous, or able to channel mystical energy. At level 8, we'd be a monk 5. This is a big level for us. First off, our martial arts die does get its first increase. It goes from a d4 to a d6. It's not amazing, but we'll take every little bit of damage we can get for our unarmed strikes. And then yes, of course, we get extra attack. Super important for us, giving us 2 attacks with our longsword now when we take the attack action. And then yeah, we also get that oft-lauded, oft-hated monk feature, Stunning Strike here. This lets us, when we hit an enemy with a melee weapon attack, and again, this can mean an unarmed strike, we can spend a key point to try and stun them until the end of our next turn. They get to make a constitution saving throw to avoid it, which is why a lot of people like to say that it's not a very good ability. But if they fail, stunned is a brutal condition to inflict on an enemy, no question. When you stun them, attack rolls against them are made with advantage. That's awesome. They're incapacitated, so they can't take any actions or reactions. They can't move. They speak falteringly. And, interestingly for us especially, they automatically fail both their dexterity and, yes, strength saving throws. So yes, of course, if we can stun the enemy, it would do great things for our damage, giving us advantage on our attacks and making them auto-fail our push into spike growth. The problem with it, of course, is that pesky constitution saving throw that they get, meaning it wouldn't work all that reliably on at least the toughest enemies that we'd be fighting against typically. Still, we do have an 18 wisdom, so it's not like it would just auto-fail or anything. When I crunch numbers going forward, I'm not going to assume that our target is stunned, if for no other reason than because we just don't have a lot of key points to spare, but definitely pull out Stunning Strike judiciously once in a while and reap the benefits for doing so for you and your entire party. But at level 9, I think I'm probably going back to Druid. There are a couple of good reasons not to. First off, more monk levels means more key points. If your combat encounters tend to run long and or you don't get very many short rests at your table for every combat encounter you have, go ahead and take more monk levels until you feel comfortable. But second off, at monk 6 we get key empowered strikes, which makes our unarmed strikes magical for the purpose of overcoming resistance. Now, I'm gonna hope and assume that at this point we've been able to get like an insignia of claws or an Eldritch Claw tattoo or something that would help us overcome that particular problem. But if you question the likelihood of that happening at your table anytime soon, go ahead and grab Monk 6 at least. Also, open hand monks do get Wholeness of Body, which lets you use your action once per day to heal yourself for 3 times your monk level. It's not amazing, but 18 hit points is some decent healing. And, you also get another 5 feet of move speed at Monk 6, so sure, plenty of reasons to go that route if need be. I'm assuming that we're happy with Monk 5 and going back to Druid for, yes, more temporary hit points from our symbiotic entity, but also we would be a Druid 4 here, which would give us another ability score increase or feat. And yeah, I want to use that to bump my dexterity, capping it at 20, which makes me very happy. And don't forget also that we get Wild Shape improvement here, which means that we can now, if we need to, Wild Shape into a creature with a challenge rating of 1/2 or lower, and it can have a swim speed now. So yeah, that'll probably come in handy once in a while. At level 9, it's time for our next damage report. And since we last checked, we've added a second longsword attack. We've bumped our dexterity modifier twice, actually, not to mention our wisdom modifier once. We've raised our martial arts die to a d6, and even gained a little utility and survivability while we were at it. We are performing at peak Way of the Open Spores drunk now. And so, against an enemy with a 10 armor class and a +0 to their strength and constitution saving throws, we would on average do 77 damage per round here. And against an enemy with a 16 and a +6, it would be 54 DPR. Okay, little Open Spores drunk. I mean, that's actually keeping us closer to the top of the charts compared to other tier 1 sustained DPR builds at this level, and we actually have fewer asterisks now. 5 key points should get us through at least one entire combat encounter, the vast majority of the time, especially if we're needing a round of setup, right? And we've got more temporary hit points to help us hold on to our bonus damage to boot. I'm feeling pretty good about where we're at. Let's see how hard we can plateau. At level 10, we would be a Druid 5, and that means we get 3rd level Druid spells. Kinda like I'd want to do for pretty much the rest of this build, I think. I'd really just focus on grabbing all the best support and utility spells here. Aura of Vitality is a super efficient heal, though I'd primarily only use it outside of combat to heal 70 hit points on average over a minute. Really strong. Dispel Magic, of course. And then, of course, there's the oft maligned on this channel, Conjure Animals spell, if you really just want to feel like a cheater. Treant Monk actually did a fantastic breakdown on the problems with Conjure Animals recently and how to make a better summoner. You should check it out if you haven't. Anyway, there's nothing I would plan on using in combat here to increase our damage, so yeah, pick your favorites. At level 11, we'd be a Druid 6, and we get Fungal Infestation. I'll admit, I don't love this ability, mechanics-wise at least. Flavor-wise, it's fantastic. It tells us that Wisdom modifier times per day when a small or medium beast or humanoid, it's very specific rules there, dies within 10 feet of us, that's a pretty small range, we can use our reaction to cause it to stand up immediately with 1 hit point. It then uses the zombie stat block for an hour, after which point it dies again, assuming that it managed to survive for an hour in the first place. This zombie now takes their turn immediately after ours and obeys our mental commands, but all it can do is make a single attack on its turn. It's super fun and flavorful. And believe me, there is nothing I would love more than to bring back my own dead ally to life and just have them make zombie attacks for a while I puppet them. I'm not going to assume that we have a zombie companion with us in combat, since there are just so many restrictions on using it. I have no idea if you're going to have had someone die within 10 feet of you, let alone whether or not they're a small or medium beast or humanoid, but I hope you have a ton of fun with it when you can. Don't forget, our Halo of Spores damage goes up to a 1d6 here, which for us is 2d6 if we're using it while Symbiotic Entity is active. At level 12, we would be a Druid 7, and we get 4th level spells. Again, pick your favorites. I would encourage you to consider Blight for some decent single target burst damage. The ever useful Polymorph. Wall of Fire can work great, especially with a build like this that's pushing enemies. Or, again, if you want to be a cheater, conjure Woodland Beings. At level 13, we'd be a Druid 8, and we get another ability score increase or feat. And yeah, I'm gonna say let's bump our Wisdom and cap that 2. I love having 2 capped ability scores. This means we would now have a 20 armor class with no armor or a shield. And that's to say nothing of any magic items you might have, like a cloak or a ring of protection or bracers of defense. Maybe more importantly, for our damage numbers anyway, this makes it more difficult for enemies to succeed on their saves against our pushes and Halo of Spores and even stunning strikes, etc, etc. Also, we do get another wild shape improvement here. We can now wild shape into a beast that's challenge rating 1 or less, and it can have a flying speed, so that will be very handy once in a while. But at level 13, for our next damage report, our Halo of Spores damage has increased, as well as our likelihood of succeeding on pushing and damaging our enemies with Halo of Spores. But also, interestingly, now that we have 4th level spell slots, it actually would make sense, even damage-wise, to start to use Moonbeam here instead of Spike Growth, even though Moonbeam gives enemies a chance to save against the damage, unlike Spike Growth. And it's a Constitution saving throw, no less, because, like I've said, they still take half damage even if they make their save on Moonbeam. And because it's scaled so well, doing 4d10 damage now both when we push them into it and when they start their turn there, the numbers just make sense to switch to Moonbeam. That said, of course, there are plenty of reasons to still use Spike Growth if you want. You might not have a 4th level spell slot. You might want a big, huge area of effect that can potentially damage and snare lots of bad guys. I'm going to assume that we're using Moonbeam here as it makes the numbers look slightly better, but just know your options and when to use them. But against an enemy with a 10 armor class here and a +0 to their strength and constitution saving throws, we would on average do 92 DPR, almost hit that century mark. And against a 17 armor class and a +7 to saves, it's 58 DPR. And yeah, that's a little increase, but it's a fairly severe plateau since we last checked. But don't forget all the fantastic utility, defense, and support features that we've picked up along the way. We are a seriously well-rounded character here that's pumping out some pretty significant damage. Right now, we're pretty comfortably like in the middle of tier 2 compared to other sustained DPR builds that I've done at this level. And that's better than most. A pretty happy place to be. At level 14, we'd be a Druid 9, and we get 5th level spells. Again, pick your favorites, again, focusing on utility and support. Though Awaken might let you get a tree companion that fights at your side, depending on how your DM rules it at your table. You could get Gesh for some really nice communication utility. Greater Restoration is always handy. Mass Cure Wounds could let you bring up multiple downed allies. I said allies, not enemies. Can you believe it? Tree Stride is a lot of fun for teleporting all over the battlefield. Have fun with it. At level 15, we would be a Druid 10, and we get Spreading Spores as a Spores Druid, and while this feature isn't like great, we will get a nice little damage bump out of it potentially. Here's how it works. Now, while we have Symbiotic Entity active, we can use a bonus action to like cast our Halo of Spores so that it works not in a 10-foot radius around us, but in a 10-foot cube within 30 feet of us. The one advantage to doing this is that a creature would now take damage not with our reaction when they're close to us, but whenever they move into that cube or start their turn there. So yes, the language here is similar to the Moonbeam spell and others like it, meaning that we can cause them to take damage both when we push them into it and when they start their turn there, effectively letting us double up on the Halo of Spores damage. They do still get to make a Constitution save against it, and still don't take half damage if they succeed. We're also prohibited from using our reaction to deal Halo of Spores damage now, but I mean, since we're pushing enemies into an area of effect anyway, I'm gonna assume that we're using this going forward. And yeah, the Halo of Spores damage does continue to scale. It's up to a 1d8 now, which isn't a huge increase, but 2d8 if Symbiotic Entity is active, and 4d8 if they're taking it twice per turn. So that's not half bad. I really wish it would do half damage on a successful save, especially since it's a Constitution saving throw. That would make it a pretty strong ability, I think, but at least it's a lot better than it was when we started. Look, scaling. Kind of. So long as we build for it. At level 16, we would be a Druid 11, and that means 6th level spells. Again, pick your favorites, but I think you ought to consider one of these 3. Heal, for a flat 70 hit points of healing, all in one go, one of the best and most efficient in-combat heal spells in the game. Hero's Feast is a wonderful buff, giving advantage on wisdom saves for your entire party, as well as immunity to fear and a big bump to our maximum hit points for 24 hours. And finally, Transport via Plants is just some really fantastic world hopping power if you need that utility, but pick your favorite. And finally, for us, at level 17, we'd be a Druid 12, and that means a final ability score increase or feat. I think I'd probably go Resilient Constitution at this point if you hadn't already, which you very well may have and maybe should have, as it lets us increase our Constitution by 1. So like I said at the beginning, that might be worth considering going Con 15 instead of 14 so that we could get it to a 16 here. And then yes, we would have proficiency in our Constitution saving throws, which is fantastic for not only those saves, but also for our concentration checks, among other things. And with us constantly concentrating on a spell and that being such a big part of our damage, yeah, arguably something we should have done very early on. But for our final damage report, I'm going to go ahead and assume that we are upcasting Moonbeam at the 6th level now for 6d6 of damage twice in a round if we push them into it. And plus, the area of Moonbeam pairs nicely with the area of effect of our Spreading Spores. They're both just a 10 by 10. And yeah, that Spreading Spores, like I've said, has scaled to a nice 4d8 over an entire round if we can push the enemy into it as well. And thus, against enemies with a 10 armor class and a +0 to those strength and con saves, we would on average do 124 DPR. And against an 18 AC and a +8 to saves, it's 72 damage per round. And yeah, that kind of keeps us like in the middle of tier 2 compared to other sustained DPR builds that I've done to date at this level. And just think of what a strong support character we've become to boot. So let's go over final thoughts. The tier score for this character, if you take the damage reports that we calculate on for every armor class and plus to save at each of the 4 damage reports and just average that all into one big number, we end up with a 51. And that puts them near the bottom of tier 2, right below the Bladesinger Monk, actually, and ahead of one of my all-time favorites for weirdness, the Thornlock. In the end, I think my favorite thing about this character is the synergy that we get between these two subclasses. What a monk wants is a nice way to add damage to every single attack, since they get 4 of them pretty reliably in their early career, right? And what an open hand monk really wants is a way to take the best advantage possible of their ability to push a target a whopping 15 feet. And Spores Druids bring both of those things in a way that no other subclass really can, I think. And it just feels like such a great fit that it fills me with lots of warm fuzzies. Now, sure, as we've discussed, there are plenty of caveats to go along with this build. Setup time, damage being dependent upon your temporary hit points being up, lack of key points, those are like the key ones. pun intended. But let's be honest, few of my builds come strictly caveat-free, right? Because, as we all know, the best laid plans of monks and men gang aft agley once you get them out of the lab and onto the battlefield. But here is a truth that you can take to the bank. Having the core of an open hand monk with lots of attacks, extra move speed, the ability to stun and slow fall and catch arrows with your bare hands, coupled with all of the fun of pushing your enemies into punishing spell effects, combined further with the really nice survivability that this character has with all of those temporary hit points that we're getting, plus a decent armor class, and all of the really great support and utility that you innately get with lots of druid levels, these things are going to combine into a character that is both really fun and really powerful, even when your best laid plans do go awry. So that is the build for the week, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. More importantly, I hope you know how much I love you, because I do. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for all that you do for me, for the channel. I hope you'll check out the other content on the channel if you're not currently in the habit of doing so. But above all, I hope that you be good and kind, and that you stay safe, and that you're happy, and that I see you again really soon. But until then, take care. Bye. I have a feeling it's going to be a long hour and a half of recording here. I hope my voice can make it through. But fortunately, my lovely wife made me some yummy honey lemon tea. Oh, that is hot. I think I just burned off all my taste buds. Why you creeping up on me, Mike? Quit it. Seriously. Man, just think of all the really cool things I could do with this cold voice. All those Barry White songs I could be singing. Let's get it on. Or Johnny Cash songs. I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. Because you're mine, I walk the line. Stop it. Maybe I could even be like the guy that does the previews for movies. In a world where dragons and elves reign supreme, there was a drunk. There was an open Spores drunk who knew that things could be different. All right, here we go. Here we go. Well, don't say that. Don't say that. But, well, don't even say that. But of course, feel free to go again. Whoa!
Oh my gosh!
Oh, you scared me.
Colby! Colby! I have a Dungeons and Dragons emergency! Come and help me! I need help!
That was my neighbor. She's visiting my wife. That scared the crap out of me. Right, get my heart rate back down here. I don't even remember what I was talking about.